Hey, Mace, can you say something so I can do this sound check, please?
Say something, I'm giving up on you.
Say something, not sing something.
I'll be the one if you let me to.
Not helpful, dumbass.
Anywhere I would have
all right,
followed
that's not
you.
helpful. But you sound amazing.
Say something, I'm giving up on you.
Welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I am Sarah Westbrook, and you have been serenaded by my very sexy co-host and husband, Mason.
You've been serenaded. It sounds a little bit like you've been catfished or, something like that.
Yeah, you get to decide
Smile,
whether or
you're
not
on
it was...
candid camera.
Right, you get to decide. The listener gets to decide if it was a good thing or a bad thing that they had to listen to you sing your heart out. During
that
the
wasn't
sound
singing
check.
my heart out. No.
Oh, that's true.
No, we didn't even get close to that.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is meant for educational purposes only.
We've talked about why people lie before in one of our previous episodes. We have talked about...
That was episode... We said it when we recorded the special event. I'll look it up. You keep talking.
I don't remember now, but I probably have it easier than you do. But anyway, it is...
Dead air. Dead air.
24.
Episode 24.
Yeah, episode 24. Anyway, so we've talked about why people lie before, and we've talked about polygamy before. This series that we're going through now is really about truth-telling, and it really is revolving around the fact that your book has come out. And so just kind of that, the book is filled with truth-telling. It is a story that is raw, and it just tells so much. It's difficult to read for me. It was difficult to read. For the most part, the feedback that we've gotten has been that it has been riveting and
real
yeah. and enjoyable. But it really just, it tells your story in a raw truth that has not been faked. Maybe it can be faked, but it has not been faked. And so as we go through these few episodes where we're talking about truth-telling and why we wanted to, again, kind of pull in a little bit of a religious thing, what was surrounding the whole Joseph Smith and polygamy thing that made him lie about it, because...
Specifically today, we're going to be talking mostly about Fanny Alger.
Right, well,
Probably.
that's the start of it, of course.
And
maybe if you look at an extended lie, you would look, you want to get back to the initial, well, why did you lie at the beginning? And then, maybe that it was just easier to continue the lie or whatever. But so that's where we're starting. But why did you lie about this situation? What did you have to gain by lying? What did you lose by lying? And so on.
Well, and, we're 4 episodes into season 2, maybe I should share with the audience why I chose to do this first, the book promo and everything, as the truth-telling series. And the reason is because several weeks ago, my mom sent me a text letting me know that my grandfather, my Grandpa T's health was failing, that all of the siblings had been alerted, that they didn't feel like there was going to be a lot of time left for him, and that we needed to come and say our goodbyes. And in a mess of text messages, which are cataloged on our Facebook page, if you want to go jump into Sarah's Dysfunctional Family, it is all there on Facebook to be seen. I did that on purpose, again, because I'm interested in backing up accountability and honesty with the evidence, which my siblings absolutely hate, because they're like, hey, now my lies can't work. Damn it. But really, it's because I've been blamed a lot. And one of the things that my brother said in that horrific text exchange that was between myself, my siblings, and their spouses. So, Mason, you were there. And I'm going to use the pseudonyms that I gave my siblings in the book. So, Joey and his wife, my sister Evelyn, who is single, and then my sister Charlie and her, at that point, was fiance, now is her husband, were involved in this text. And one of the things that my brother, Joey, said was, your book is full of lies. And I had to chuckle at that because he has not read the book. The only one of my siblings who has read a part of the book is Charlie, who is my youngest sister who got married. She's the one that uninvited me from the family wedding in order to protect my parents, because my parents claimed that they would be way too nervous if my kids and I showed up. So our family was excluded to protect my father especially, and my mom a little bit, their anxiety levels. And so I just had to kind of chuckle because my brother talked about how everything I'm doing, my podcasts are dishonest, and, you know, my book is dishonest, and my memes are dishonest, and I'm just a big liar trying to get attention, and I play the role of the perpetual victim. And so I really wanted to talk about the value of being honest, because I get why he says that. He's repeating things that my father has said. He has no basis for that. My brother and I have hardly spoken since I got married to you, Mason, and left the home. Like, if
Right.
you took all of the time and mushed it together, I'm going to say somewhere between 3 to 5 days is all I've spent in the presence of my brother. And any time that we spent time over the last 5 years together, it's been very superficial.
Right.
Which isn't
We don't talk about
necessarily
important things.
right. Which isn't, well, we talk about plumbing because my brother is a very successful plumber in Colorado. And I mean, I would be happy to give him a shout out because he's a fabulous plumber, but then I would breach that confidentiality. And he won't give me permission to do it, so I'm not gonna. But if you happen to know my family personally and you know who my brother is, he's a phenomenal plumber. He's a very trustworthy plumber, and he has a very successful business. If you live in his area, hire the man. He's good at what he does. But I also want to point out that my brother's lack of engagement with family isn't just me. He's that way with everybody. It was like once he moved out of the home, the only person he really talks to is my dad and occasionally my mom. But both of my other sisters have moved closer to him, trying to have a relationship. But Joey has not made any effort the other way to reciprocate. And that's our experience with him as well. He was one of those siblings that when we wanted to visit, we would go to him, but he would never initiate anything other than the occasional birthday call or text. But again, brief. We're talking like a 2-minute conversation. So just wanted to give that basis.
As far as we know, right? Like
Right.
we don't really understand his relationship with your siblings because
No. I'm repeating what my siblings have told me directly because I've complained to my mother and my sisters, and they were like, "Yeah, don't take it personal. That's the way Joey is with everybody. Like, he never comes home to visit us. We have to beg him to come our way. We always go to him." And the sisters were like, "We really liked Colorado, so we moved to the Silt,
we'll
Colorado, or the Grand Junction, Colorado as well, to be closer for him." And Charlie's new husband is actually a journeyman, I think is what they call it, under my brother in order to get his plumbing license as well, because he too is interested in the plumbing business. And so they're spending at least the next couple of years with new brother-in-law working for my brother Joey in order to get his career, off the floor. And my brother is a great teacher when it comes to plumbing. Like, some of the positive experiences that I've had with him is our son Eric also went to Silt, Colorado, and my brother mentored him. So my brother mentored him to learn the plumbing business during COVID because my son was a senior in high school, and he's like, "I need out of this teeny tiny town in Osage where I'm not really finding my feet. So he went and spent that summer with my brother, and my brother taught him basic plumbing, which is a great skill for Eric to have. It also taught Eric that he is not a plumber. He hated... He tells me, I hated all the shit that came along with plumbing. And I'm like, well, okay, very good.
It
very
also
apropos.
taught him that your brother isn't trustworthy.
Yes, that's the other thing. It taught him that my brother is not trustworthy because according to my son, my brother loves to spend time, which is really interesting because I get the same reports about my father and the rest of my family really is that the males in my family enjoy spending time where I'm not present, bashing me and saying things about me. And Eric came home really frustrated saying he would say things about who you are as a person that just aren't true. And I think I know you better than he does because you've basically, you've raised me for the last 18 years. And all these things that Joey is saying is just simply not true. And it really, unfortunately, damaged the relationship. But that's the same thing with my father, too.
Yeah,
we're totally off topic here. But when Eric got old enough to see how my dad was representing me, it destroyed their relationship as well. I didn't have to say things to my kids about that. They got to experience it for themselves. And Eric was fed up with my dad because he, number one, wouldn't stop bullying Brig. And number two, was continuing to say things that just simply weren't true about me. And so his trust in my father and my brother was probably permanently damaged, which is really unfortunate because they did have a good relationship. So anyway, back to truth-telling and post-affair honesty. I just felt like giving the why we're talking about truth-telling. Wanted to give that backstory. All right. So our intent for today is how can being honest about the hard things in life protect ours and others' mental wellness? And so, Mason, I'm going to turn the time over to you to kind of give the brief history.
You're going to turn the time over to me?
Yeah, because...
Or do we need to have an opening prayer first, too?
Oh, God, no. But even though these mashed potatoes are cold, they are still delicious. I think these are the ones you made. You did good, Mason. These are delicious, even though they're cold. So go ahead. You give the history shit. Make it brief. We're keeping that brief. Mason's going to, give you some places you can go if you want more data. And then, of course, there's a great deal of data with links to the source material in the show notes, as always. So, Mason, take us away.
Yeah, for starters, most of what we're going to talk about today is either coming from Todd Compton's book, In Sacred Loneliness, or from the Gospel Topics essays on LDS.org. So either one of those is a place to go to hear what we're saying. Our opinion of the Gospel Topics essays is the same as most people who've walked away from the church, and even some of those that are still in the church, is that they're kind of whitewashed. They're kind of, every once in a while you can feel that you're getting gaslit about the topic, whatever it is that is being discussed. And so they're a place...
And we will provide examples of that gaslighting here in a minute. Yeah.
Right. They may come up, and frankly, I'm not here to talk about the Gospel Topics essays. You're not here to talk about them. If you want to understand the Gospel Topics essays, then go read them. If you want to understand In Sacred Loneliness, then go read it. We're not here to educate you on those things. We're just to pull a couple of pieces out that help us with our mental wellness and our mental health. If you want more in-depth talk about polygamy or Fanny Alger or anything like that, just Google Mormon Stories, Mormonism Live. There's a few other podcasts out there too that have really dug into these topics and really have done their fact checking and timelines and all that stuff. So that might be helpful for you too if that's what you're looking for. Real
quick shout out. The one that I liked the best was episode number 1, Fanny Alger. This is from the podcast A Year of Polygamy by Lindsay Hansen Park. That was a really good one that I feel like Lindsay did a really good job of presenting the facts without a lot of judgment in a way that was meant to help us understand rather than be critical of. The other one that I've got actually a timeline for, which is a phenomenal what's the word I'm looking for? Visual. There it is. A phenomenal visual is from Hemlock Knots. Hemlock Knots also has a podcast called Fanny Alger, Fact or Fiction. We are saying Fanny Alger. It might be Alger, but for today's purposes, we're going to say Fanny Alger. And then, of course, there's several podcasts in Mormon Stories or Mormonism Live that has done this. But we will go ahead and put a link for the Year of Polygamy and the Hemlock Knots stuff in our show notes because they're a newer one. So that way you can find the stuff that we're responding to.
And of course, polygamy is one of those things that's been talked about a lot. And there's reasons. And let me just kind of list a few of them.
I mean, I've typed just the words Fanny Alger into my Spotify search bar, and there are literally hundreds.
Right.
Hundreds
It's come
of
up a lot.
hits. Yeah.
So polygamy itself is kind of icky. There's a lot of lying and secrecy that went on around polygamy in the Mormon Church.
Which both those in and outside of Mormonism agree about.
Right. I don't think there's too much argument about whether or not that happened.
Maybe the intent is argued about, but the fact that it was done in secret and hidden is not.
Right. Even when the church was finally pressured into giving it up, they didn't actually give it up. So there's that. There's the issues of women's equality that go along with polygamy. So there's a lot of different issues that are involved in polygamy, which is probably one of the reasons it has been talked about so much. It's also one of the ickiest things from Mormon history, and that affected probably the largest group of people when it comes to ickiness. Like, maybe the Mountain Meadows Massacre was worse, but it was a single isolated incident that affected a large people for a massacre, but not a large people in general kind of a thing. So there's been lots of talk.
There's
lots of talk about this. Yeah. So.
That's what happens when Sarah interrupts.
That is exactly what happens.
I want to be cautious in comparing what is worse and what is less worse. I would say it's definitely the most controversial issue in Mormon history, mostly because we can talk about race, but polygamy impacted race as well, or like racism as well. We can talk about the LGBT issues. It, impacted that. And a lot of the violence in Mormon history was surrounding polygamy because, I mean, if we look at this from a biological standpoint, men and women get very protective when it comes to their mates. And we see this across all mammals. And so, this is kind of that ickiest thing. For me personally, it was the one doctrine of the church that never made sense, that always made me feel icky from the time I was probably 11 or 12, which is when I would have been sexually developed enough and cognizant enough of the effect of it. It just didn't ever make sense to me.
Right.
So
if Sarah ever shuts up,
I won't.
I'm going to go through just a few details here at the
Even
beginning.
after I die, you are going to have my running monologue in your head. I will haunt you.
That's scary. All right, so I'm going to set a timer because I'm going to do this in 5 minutes if Sarah doesn't interrupt too much. So
just pause the timer every time
no,
I interrupt.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
All right.
It's already running.
I'm going to eat my potatoes. Here's my tape.
So really just a few details about Fanny Alger because she's widely considered to be the first either polygamous marriage from Joseph Smith, or some people still call it an affair. Either way, it's the first relationship outside of his marriage that we know about.
I call it an affair.
Right, and whatever, and we'll talk a little bit about why that matters and what are some of the indications of one way or the other. But basically what we have is that it looks like they were married sometime around 1833. That's when the affair happened. There's
Mormon.org says 1835.
Right. So Todd Compton says 1833. Mormon.org says, or the Gospel Topics Essays says 1835. She was either 17 or 19. 17 if it was 1833. 19 if it was 1835. A little bit younger than the average, which I don't find that very significant. But there is some conversation about that and why that matters.
Do you want me to speak on that now, or do you want me to give you your 5 minutes? Okay, shut up. Rude.
We do know that Fanny was married to her husband that she married after that. I think it was Mr. Butler in 1836. So whatever happened between her and Joseph Smith happened before then, because then she left Kirtland, I believe, and she was not involved actively in the church or with the church after that. As to whether or not she was a member.
And there are rumors that Emma kicked her out because she was pregnant and she miscarried the baby, although there's not a lot of historical data to support it. There is some that is suggestive. So keep going.
So there's a lot of that kind of stuff around there. A couple of things that just talk about the early beginnings of polygamy. Lyman Johnson, who was one of the original apostles in 1835, recorded that in 1831 he was told by Joseph Smith about the law of polygamy, but that it wasn't time yet. W.W. Phelps was told that in 1831 they were given a commandment to intermarry with the Lamanite women.
Were those contemporary records, or are they they're reporting from the 1940s saying, oh, it was probably about 1831? Do you know?
I don't remember.
Okay.
And I got these all from Todd Compton's book, so you can go with that. But he does say that there's contemporary and recollective evidence that suggests polygamy was either talked about or practiced as early as the New York time period, which was before 1831, because that's when the church moved to Kirtland.
Hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook.
So very, very early in the church's birth and beginnings, this is already talked about. When Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered in 1831, one of the big deals about that was that there was an accusation, I believe from Ezra Booth, that Joseph Smith had propositioned his sister. There was a doctor there that was brought in to castrate Joseph Smith, which makes sense if that's what the idea was.
Which is highly controversial. Again, Mormons are like, no, that's false. Ex-Mormons are like, hey, that's real. Read the data, make your own choice.
Right. It feels to me like there's enough data to suggest that that is the case. But whether or not you believe that, that's on you. But there is evidence that that was the case, suggesting that there were propositions and maybe illicit or inappropriate advances from Joseph Smith during that time period.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think it was Fawn Brody who said the doctor was there to castrate him, and I think it was Todd Compton that said maybe, maybe not. Okay. If my memory is serving me correctly, do not quote me.
Right, and there you go. Like there's some situations where we have evidence that suggests that that's the case, but certainly not enough to say this absolutely was the case. So
correct.
It makes sense if that's where we're at, that might have been the case. And the reason we're talking about that, of course, is just because this is the first one. We have the record from Oliver Cowdery when he wrote in 1838 saying that calling this as a dirty, nasty affair between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger.
I'm sorry, what year was that?
He recorded it in 1838. So just a few years after this would have happened. Of course, Mormons will say, but yeah, Oliver Cowdery was already disaffected from the church at that point in time. But really, that's just the way that Mormonism tries to get rid of everything that is against the church as well. They were disaffected, so they would say anything.
Oliver Cowdery would have said that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, prior to the revelation coming, according to Joseph Smith, correct?
Oh, almost everything came before the revelation, and that's a part of this big issue too.
Problem.
So
Red
one
flags.
of the things that has always been significant to me, if you look at section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is where the revelation about celestial marriage and polygamy is recorded, in the prelude to that, I forget the section heading, I think is what it's called. The last line says, although the revelation was recorded in 1843, it is evident from the historical records that the doctrines and principles involved in this revelation had been known by the prophet since 1831. Well, what's interesting to me is that if the evidence suggests that the prophet knew, and now we're learning that not only did he know, but he was acting on some of these principles but the revelation was not recorded until 1843. For me, that feels like a cover-up. It feels like, well, this has come out enough, or now I'm finally in a place where I can really pursue this, so I got to write this down. It feels like this is just it's almost like a back history, or we talk about, prophecies that, well, something has happened, and so you backdate the prophecy so that it can look like you actually knew beforehand. That's what it feels like to me. You call it what you want, but that's what it felt like, is just that we're saying all of this as a way to justify the behavior that happened before 1843, because a ton of it happened before 1843.
So one of the things that's really interesting is if I look at this hemlock, how did you do on your 5 minutes, by the way?
6.5 minutes, so not bad.
I did not do 1.5 minutes of talk. So just saying. I purposefully clamped my mouth shut. Alrighty. So some of the interesting things that Hemlock reports in this timeline that's available in the show notes is that in 1831, in January, Joseph Smith moves to Kirtland, Ohio. So if we're saying it happened in New York, we're talking about, 1829, 1830, 1831
That's
time period.
less than 1 year after the founding of the church.
Right.
If they moved in January of 1831.
Okay, so less than a year after the founding of the church. But in January, Joseph receives the revelation and the commandment, thou shalt love thy wife with all thy heart, shalt cleave unto her and none else, and he that looketh upon a woman to lust after her shall deny the faith, and shall not have the Spirit, and if he repents not, shall be cast out. Thou shalt not commit adultery, and he that committeth adultery and repenteth not shall be cast out. LDS D&C, section 42, verses 22 through 23, and the RLDS church, so that's the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Emma's congregation after the Brigham Young Emma split. It appears in their Doctrine and Covenants, section 42, verse 7D. Is what that says. I don't know what that means, but that's what it says. And then May 7th of 1831, Joseph Smith Jr. receives a revelation stating marriage is ordained of God unto man, wherefore it is lawful that he should have one wife, and they twain shall be one flesh, and all this that the earth might answer to the ends of its end of its creation. This is LDS DNC 49, 15 through 16, and the RLDS DNC section 49, verses 3A through B. And then on August 30th of 1831, Revelation through Joseph Smith declares lust a sin. Verily I say unto you, as I have said before, that he looketh on a woman to lust after her, or if any shall commit adultery in their hearts, they shall not have the Spirit, but shall deny the faith and shall fear. LDS Doctrine and Covenants, section 63, verse 16. The other thing that's really interesting is that in 1832, William McClellan writes a letter to Joseph Smith, the third. Yeah. He's writing the letter in 1872, describing an event that happened in November of 1832 that a colleague told him in 1838. So 6 years after, saying that Joseph Smith had had an affair with Fanny Alger, and also that the name was mixed up due to some pornographic stuff. So just kind of wanting to give you a little bit of a timeline, but also demonstrate contemporary records, the DNC sections revealed in 1831 versus the non-contemporary records that supposedly occurred 1832-ish or later dates.
Well, and I feel like we're getting a little bit into the weeds again, because our purpose here is not to demonstrate whether or not Fanny Alger was a wife or this actually happened. We're just going off of what we have researched, what we have read, what we have studied. Our belief is that it did happen. And then we want to look at why did we lie about it? Why was Joseph Smith dishonest about this? And then ultimately to get into how do we as individuals today benefit from being honest or receiving honest communication in situations like this. And so that's kind of where we want to go. There's one thing that Bill Reel said when they were talking about the SEC investigation. So on Mormonism Live, there's been a lot, of course, to talk about the SEC investigation. But when he was talking about that, he says that when you're hiding, what you're hiding is usually worse than the lies that you're telling. In other words, I think in this case, he was saying the church was kind of ambivalent about how much money they had. Somebody suggested that it was $150 billion. And like, okay. The church is just kind of like, okay. And he said that suggested that they probably had a lot more than that, because if they're willing to accept that number while not still being really honest about it, it probably means that there's a lot more. Whereas if they had a lot less, they'd be like, oh, no, we don't have anywhere close to that. And so when I think about this affair, polygamy, all of this stuff, what is it that Joseph Smith was trying to gain by lying about it rather than being honest about it and saying, hey, this is what the Lord said we need to do?
So maybe we're in the weeds, but I'm going to say they're not quite ankle high weeds. I get what you're saying, because, yeah, we definitely can tangent. I mean, if you've been listening to our show for a while, we have lots of squirrel moments. I'm kind of establishing what my intent is to kind of establish that this wasn't as secretive as Joseph Smith, I think, wanted it to be. And that's evidenced by how many people, we're talking about people that are hearing things in claiming is like 1838. So 6 years later, 34 years later, but there's a third-hand story. Like there's so much information about Fanny Alger and that affair that is really contemporary-ish records, with people calling it a marital affair instead of a polygamous marriage, that I think it's important to point that out, because one of the things that happens when you hide things and keep it secret, but there's some goofy behaviors or goofy things going on, the rumor mill starts going like crazy. So one of the hard things is in these non-contemporary records, how are you able to tell which ones actually occurred in time? And right. We do have some of those, so some of the things that I think it's important to point out is what was the nature of the relationship of Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger. Well, Fanny was Emma's helper. Basically she was the babysitter. She was the nanny. Right. Like Joseph Smith slept with the nanny. We're going to say that he slept with her because in that time period's language, they wouldn't have said, you're not going to hear Emma Smith say Joseph and Fanny were having sex in the barn. That's just not the way, they're not as crass as we are today. Sarah has no issues saying that word, obviously. But Emma Smith's record is she saw the quote unquote transaction, and transaction was a common word to describe sex. And I think that Julia Sanders really did a good job in her episode on Mormon stories that we referenced the last time on those language differentials. So things like I knew Joseph Smith in every way, or I knew him, that those are kind of those words. So we've got to make sure that we put this in context. I also think that it's very telling that the current church is still gaslighting about this, because there's almost like this, we still have to uphold the character of Joseph Smith. And I find that to be really harmful. Let me see if I can pull up, because I really wanted to quote it. Let me see if it's still, it's not here. All right, Mason, fill the empty space for me for a minute. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
I can't find my search history. Oh, there it is.
What are you looking for?
The quote that I got, Fanny Alger, medieval timeline.
Well, and I think that the big thing here is that if the church somehow loses the battle about Joseph Smith's character, I feel like they lose the battle in general. Because so much for so long has been hinged upon the fact that Joseph Smith is a prophet, that the Book of Mormon is true, and if you can question his character as early as 1831, 1832, 1833, very, very early in this process, he was already demonstrating what I would call predatory behaviors, a sexual deviant. And a lot of what he did with this prophecy or this revelation, quote unquote, from Doctrine and Covenants 132 feels like a cover up for his behavior rather than an announcement that this is what the Lord wants us to do.
Right. Well, and so I actually didn't find it. I lied. But on Mormon.org, Fanny Alger moved in with the Smiths between 1830 and 1831 as the hired help. And so in 1830, Mason, how old would she have been?
14.
So, yeah, it's...
Well, and not the first time that Joseph Smith had married girls that had been living in his home that had essentially been adopted by him and Emma as daughters, not legally, but essentially adopted as daughters, and then they got turned into wives. It's just, it's icky. It's almost like, this revelation comes out in 1843. You might as well have just said, hey, y'all, I've been trying this for a while, and I just figured it's time for all of us to do this.
Yeah.
And instead of that, or the threats, even at the end of the Doctrine and Covenants 132, in the last several verses, God talks about destroying women 3 times at least. Like, if they don't follow this, then they'll be destroyed. And it's harsh language. It feels controlling. It feels manipulative. And the timeline is just off.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to recognize that Oliver Cowdery and Emma Smith, who were probably 2 of the people closest to the prophet in that time, contemporarily speaking, neither of them denied or changed their view of this event. They both went to their deathbeds calling it an affair, and that Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated shortly after because he wouldn't stop calling it an affair. I mean, they didn't do it directly, but as you watch that timeline, the fact that he wouldn't retract that it was a marital affair, not a polygamous marriage ordained by God, definitely contributed to it. And I'm not finding, Mason, it's in that, you know what, I'm going to go back into because it was really important for me to read.
Well, and I'm certain that Emma Smith learned from that too, to just keep her mouth shut. Like, she wasn't happy about it, but she didn't speak out against Joseph Smith.
Right.
She spoke out against polygamy, but she didn't speak out against Joseph Smith, almost as a way to protect herself in that situation as well.
And I would say, what does that mean? Like, if I'm going to speak out against the practice that my husband is participating in, but I'm not going to speak out against my husband specifically, what was the relationship dynamic going on, and what were the social contexts that were there? Because, in today's day and age, it's not uncommon if, a partner finds somebody else cheating on them for them to be like, oh yeah, they cheated on me and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's something that you can investigate as well, just the relationship between the 2 of them. But everything about polygamy, first off, there's standards given in Doctrine and Covenants 132 about how polygamy should operate. Joseph Smith didn't follow any of those. It's fairly well documented that he was probably married to 1/3 to half of the wives he eventually married before he put the revelation out there for people to see. And even then, it was not official public knowledge that Mormons were practicing polygamy until 1856 or 58. I'd have to look at that. But anyway, 56 or 58, which is another 14 to 16 years after Joseph Smith was, 12 to 14 years after Joseph Smith was killed. And Brigham Young and everybody else in the leadership was living that quote-unquote commandment already. Everything about polygamy stinks of control, suppression, and I don't know, probably some other words too. But anyway, everything stinks about polygamy.
Right. Well, and I think it's also important to point out that if this is ordained of God, Fanny Alger and Joseph Smith's quote-unquote marriage didn't last very long. It ended horrifically. It ended with Emma violently tossing her out of the house and her being secreted away to a new location.
Right.
And I think that that's really telling. That's really telling as well. I'm going to give this one more.
Well, then we probably need to move into what we do with why does honesty with affairs or situations like this, why does it matter? How does it benefit us? What do we gain by being honest?
Right. Well, and I can't find that direct quote, which irritates me. But it was good. It was a good one. So just so y'all know, it was a good one.
Who was this by? Do you want me to look for it?
Well, it was the one from the church that gaslit. That was like, it was most likely happened in 1835. It was polyamorous, and it was the perfect example of the current church today gaslighting.
So from the Gospel Topics Library.
I think so, but I can't.
All right, just let's move forward. And
all right, if we find it, we'll bring it up. The reason that this Fanny Alger incident is so aggravating, I think aggravating is a good word for me, is that, if you've been following along, I cheated on Mason. And so in a way I can identify with Joseph Smith. Now, obviously there's going to be a lot of differences. I cheated with a person, my high school sweetheart. It was absolutely consensual. I don't feel like there was any undue influence in my affair between myself and my affair partner. Whereas the fact that Fanny Alger was a young teenager when she entered the Smith home later to become his polygamous wife is troubling. There was not a huge age gap. It really, the age gap. One of the things that it said in the quote that I wanted to share was that the age gap of Fanny being 17 to 19 and Joseph Smith being 27 or 29? I think it was 29.
He was born in 1805.
If we're saying 1835, he would have been 29. So at best, according to the LDS website, 19 and
so 10 years difference.
29 is a 10-year difference. They're saying that age and age gap between the spouses is pretty normal, except that the statistical report completely disagrees.
Let me read something here too that kind of speaks to what you're talking about. I didn't find exactly what you're talking about, but so this is from the Gospel Topics Essays. Fragmentary evidence suggests that Joseph Smith acted on the angel's first command by marrying a plural wife, Fanny Alger, in Kirtland, Ohio, in the mid-1830s. Several Latter-day Saints who had lived in Kirtland reported decades later that Joseph Smith had married Alger, who lived and worked in the Smith household after he had obtained. And so this is the big part right here. Decades later, that Joseph Smith had married Alger, who lived and worked in the Smith household after he had obtained her consent and that of her parents. But the thing is, no consent from Emma, which is the very first thing if you go to Doctrine and Covenants 132.
Whoa, hold on. So that is saying that Joseph Smith sought consent from Fanny's parents. Then there was the quote-unquote transaction in the barn? That's what that's saying?
Yeah. Well, and
bad. Really?
Todd Compton kind of. When
that's
he
a Todd
reads,
Compton thing?
No, that's from the Gospel Topics Library.
Yeah.
But Todd Compton also talks about that process. So he makes it possible that all did happen beforehand. But in Doctrine and Covenants 132, verse 61, and again is pertaining to the law of the priesthood, if any man espouse a virgin and desire to espouse another, and the first give her consent. Like, that's the very first thing.
Right.
So you
Emma
married someone,
has to
you want to
consent.
marry someone else. If the first one gives her consent, okay, basically is what happens. Well, Emma didn't give her consent. Emma didn't know. And so, yeah, it feels a lot like this Gospel Topic essay is they're trying to prettify it. They're trying to beautify the whole situation, right? They're trying to make it sound like, well, Joseph Smith couldn't have possibly done this in a way that was inappropriate. So let's see how we can describe this in a way that would sort of fall in line with the appropriate. Well, he got consent from the parents. He got consent from Fanny. So, so that's all good. We already know he didn't get consent from Emma on almost all of the marriages. So why even bring that up?
Right. Like, I think Emma went to her deathbed denouncing polygamy and claiming that Joseph Smith did not practice it, which is odd because she was present for the Partridge sisters' second marriage to Joseph Smith. They had to do it twice because they'd already done it. So they did a fake ceremony for poor Emma. But anyway, I think one of the things that comes up for me here is, I've been counseling couples for a long time. And I'm able, because of my own affair, I'm able to relate a lot with the cheating spouse quite frequently. But there's a huge change in intent when you go in to disclose having had an affair. At least for me, my goal was, how can I be honest and cause the least amount of damage or harm to Mason and Eric and our future baby break? Because at the end of the day, when an affair has occurred, so I'm not talking about consensual swinging or consensual polyandry or consensual polygamy. Consensual meaning all of the adult parties are in the know, consent, it's well boundaried, it's well communicated about. I'm not talking about that kind of relationship, because I've seen those types of relationships that appear to work in my clinic. It's not something that would work for you and I, Mason. Mason's like over there going, yup. But I see other couples, I see open relationships be very healthy for some people. I also see them crash and burn and be very, very ugly. So I've seen both sides, and I've seen the in-between and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that really stands out to me is that when there's an affair, meaning that one or more people have been betrayed by the action or lied to, there was something in secret, and then there's a discovery that is betrayal trauma, we already know that damage is done. It's happened. It doesn't matter how the information comes out. It's gonna hurt. But how is that hurt? How is that harm different when you go in and you say, hey, Mason, I did this, versus being caught?
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Like, one of the things that you would read about in my book is that Mason went with Eric on a father and son's camp out with our son, Eric. Eric would have been 2.5-ish at that time period. And the affair occurred that night while he was gone. It was a Friday. Eric and Mason came home early from fathers and sons due to horrific weather and Eric being absolutely terrified, and they couldn't get the tent staked down in the dark and blah, 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 blah. So it happened on Friday. I didn't tell you on Friday when you came home, Mason, because you were pissed about the tent and the camp out, and it was so fresh for me. I was not in a clear-headed space to be able to tell you. You went to sleep pretty quick. I tossed and turned all night. Saturday morning, you and Eric got up early and went back to father and sons to join that activity for their pancake breakfast and their, whatever movie or the day activities they did on Saturday. You got home late. On Saturday, I still was probably not in a place, but at that point, I was like, I'm going to tell him. But I decided not to tell you until you would have time where there could be no distractions. And so at that point, you were working as an LPN, which is an associate level nurse, correct?
No, less than that.
Less than oh, that's right, because you were an LVN, licensed vocational nurse. So it was less than an associate's degree, leveled nurse. And your schedule on the med-surg ward at that time was basically 4 days on, 3 days off, 3 days on, 4 days off, 4 days on, 3 days. It was like this rotating schedule. And you went back to work that Sunday. So you would have gone back to the camp out Saturday with Eric. Then I think you were working nights? You might have been working nights. I don't remember. But you went back to work Sunday. You worked on Thursday. I would have told you Thursday evening or first thing in the morning the following Friday if you were working nights, because I remember waiting for you to have your 3 or 4 days off, whatever it was, so that way you and I could work through it while you didn't have work distractions. Maybe having distractions would have helped. I don't know. But that's the way it played out for us. So Mason, my question is, how different, whereas, let me pause, whereas my affair partner did not tell his wife hacked into our little secret email accounts that we had created to communicate, which is, read the book, y'all. It's not my best moment. Let me just put it that way. It is pretty ugly. But his wife, who I named Megan in the book, discovered the affair because she noticed subtle changes in his behavior that were very bothersome. For one, she knew I was there because I met him on his front lawn the very first day. Again, read my book, not my finest moments. So she knew I was there. She noticed some suspicious behavior in her partner, and she started digging. Much like today, the most common way that people find out today that I'm seeing in my clinic is either they walk in on it or it's text messages or social media messages or emails or something. It goes that way. So she hacked into our secret email addresses and found out. Yours and her responses, completely different. You're two different humans. I expect that. But Mason, speaking for yourself, how would it have been different if you had discovered it rather than me coming to you and disclosing it to you in a moment where Eric was in bed and you and I could just talk?
So that's a good question. We talked about it a little bit in the planning area. There's two main ways I find that to be different. But let me just give an example real quick before I answer that. I feel like with all of the difficult things that go along with church history and the way that the church operates, I feel like they're constantly telling when they've been found out.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that the internet finally burst on the scene 2004, 2005. People can finally access some of this information.
Right, the actual source material.
The actual source material, all of those things. And then the church is like scrambling to get ahead of it. But even then, they don't get ahead of it. They only throw out the bits of information that people find and can verify. Oh, yeah, okay, this looks like it's verifiable. Everybody's on it now. Okay, well, let's throw it out there.
Right, and then they give all of these maybe, or it most likely happened like this,
right,
to satisfy the curiosity and stop the thinking.
Right.
So as a trusting member of the church, of the website and whatnot, they're going to be like, oh, well, that answer makes sense. I'm not going to think about it anymore. Right. I couldn't do that because this was way too personal.
Well, and for me and everybody now on the outside looking at it, it feels as if it's placating, and I get the impression that they're always still hiding something. So when it comes to an affair and someone telling you, in this case, you told me rather than me finding out through investigation or whatever means,
right? It
feels like, so like you said, the pain is the same. The breaking of trust is the same, in my opinion. The difference is that I feel like trust, it starts back on the path of recovery almost immediately. Because when you come to me and say, hey, this is what happened, whatever you say, I'm ashamed, I'm guilty, I feel terrible, blah, 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 I don't want to be a part of that, or even I do want to be a part of that. By the way, this is going on and I'm not going to stop. Whatever then whatever the future holds for that, I feel like the trust is immediately rekindled.
Right,
it's
the
not
recovery
there.
Is enhanced.
It's
got
not
an
there.
extra step in the right direction.
Right. I'm not going to trust you tomorrow the way that I trusted you yesterday. But because it came out in the open, because you told it, I feel like the trust can recover more quickly. The other thing is that, and this isn't described well in the book, but let me just kind of share. So the details in the book that you wrote are different than the details I was told along the way.
Yes, they were.
Some details, minor,
some
quite
pretty
significant
major.
in the difference. And I would feel like like you said, the first night you weren't in a place to even talk about it. You
Right.
waited until we at least had the ability to talk it out. We had the time.
I had to wait until my survival brain and the what the fuck did you just do? I had to wait for that internal amygdala to calm down, because if I had tried to talk about it, like if you had come in from the father and sons outing and I was like, I slept with Michael. I mean, you were already irritated. You were already tired. I was still reeling. I could not believe I had walked into that. Like, the internal self-shame was excruciating. I felt disgusting. I felt dirty. And I was terrified that I was throwing away a beautiful family. Like, up to this point, there was nothing that I mean, if somebody had asked me before that 2004 month, hey, is there any chance you or Mason would ever get divorced? I'd be like, no, we're doing great. Like, we were not having marital problems when it happened. And so I was still reeling. I had to kind of wrap my own head around what happened. And a lot of the not necessarily lies about why you got a different story, but and I don't, this is really hard because I don't want to make it sound like I'm excusing the fact that I wasn't honest, but a lot of it, a lot of the reason you got a different story was because I didn't understand and I wasn't willing to admit to some of the stupid shit that I had done that I know I shouldn't have done.
So what I was going to say...
Ooh. Sarah should wait to interrupt.
Well, and of course it's going to be different coming from your perspective than it is coming from my perspective. So
Absolutely.
I think it's valuable hearing both sides. What I was going to say, the second thing, so the first thing is that trust is able to be rebuilt more quickly because you've confessed of your own accord. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that the details are always going to be a little fuzzy. In this case, some of the details I got were because you were just not willing to accept the fact that this has happened. And it had felt different to you at the moment than it did. Like, I remember you telling me that you had basically felt like you'd gotten raped. And now, of course, you don't feel like that was the case at all. You just kind of put yourself into a stupid situation. But that's the message that I got.
Right. Well, and let me clarify why that is, because that was not... What happened is I told you about the first one, and then I got pissed by the bishop's response and pretty much said, fuck it, and slept with him more than once. And I only told you upfront about the first one, and so the details of the multiple events, I smashed them together trying to not hurt you, which wasn't fair. And those details are written about in the book. I absolutely let you assume that that's what it was. And you know, there's so many details in this, but this is why the biggest mistake that you and I made, Mason, in this is that when it happened, what we really needed was a neutral third party person, not the spiritual advisor focused on, I mean, in addition to, like, if going to the bishop is what was needed, and for us, I believe that it was at the time, because we were active Mormons, it was what you needed in order to feel like we could heal from this. So in addition to the bishop, what we really needed was couples therapy, because then a trained professional would have been able to be there to help me manage those trauma responses. Because anytime you asked me about that affair, I went into trauma brain.
Anytime you talked about it, I went into trauma brain.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so we really needed a professional's help to slow down those triggers, to teach us how to calm down, and to walk us through that. And what ended up happening, number one, our bishop did not refer us to a counselor. So I disclosed the affair to you. There was about a week or two in between that. I don't remember the exact timeline. And then you got orders to deploy to Iraq for the first time. So couples counseling would have been bad. But, just bad timing. But our bishop didn't say, y'all need to go see somebody so you can help. It was almost like you went in, Mason, you said, we're good. She's going to confess. I'm ready to forgive. We're going to move on. And the bishop was like, sweet, the end. And that really harmed us. What we needed was a counselor. Now, subsequently, I went to a counselor several months later because I adopted Brig and wasn't sleeping and I was in a bad place while you were in Iraq for multiple reasons. And that counselor, Jim, who shows up in the book, started to help me to unravel what had happened. And what ended up happening is, as Jim helped me unravel it, I started giving Mason little blips. Oh, and when it happened, this happened. And Mason was like, oh, okay, shut up, Sarah. And then, I'd go to another session. I'd come home and I'd be like, I realized that this was part of it. And so this is kind of maybe this is what, and Mason was like, great, shut up, Sarah. And so Mason ends up getting itty bitty snippets over the course of several years, which left your brain to come up with its own conclusions because we didn't process the self-discovery and there was nobody there for you teaching you how to hear what I have to say and explaining to you and helping you understand that I wasn't intentionally being dishonest with the changes in those details. Rather, I was discovering a lot about myself that impacted those decisions. And because we never talked about the details, we didn't talk about the details. We didn't.
Well, then you didn't walk into the situation thinking, all right, I'm going to have an affair here, right?
I did not.
You were confused about what was going on in your own life as well.
Very much so.
And so if you're confused about what's going on and why this happened, and I'm angry because this happened, details are going to get muddled regardless of whether or not you're trying to tell the truth. So
and that's
the difference
normal.
there, absolutely. The difference there is that if you come to me and you say this happened, then as details come out later on, I'm less inclined to think, oh, well, she just lied about it last time, and more inclined to think, well, okay, well, I'm confused about what this is going on here.
Right.
Or even if I can't connect the dots, but my first thought isn't, well, she's just lying to me. Whereas if I discover it, I feel like you tell me about it because you have to now because you've been discovered. Then as details come out later, I feel like it's all the same thing. It's like, oh, well, something else came up. Well, let me tell you what happened. Oh, well, you found something else. Well, let me tell you what happened. I feel like you're constantly just trying to patch holes instead of recognizing, hey, this wall's been knocked over. Let's fix it. And as you're picking up what you described, as you're picking up these stones and trying to put them back into place, you're like, oh, shoot, I didn't even realize that was there. Oh, let me share, right? And then you pick up another stone. Oh, shoot. I didn't even know. And so as you're sharing these details, I'm less inclined to think she's just lying again and more inclined to think we're just discovering some of what happened that led us to this situation.
Well, it's the difference between when I come to you and say, hey, this happened, I'm demonstrating sorrow and remorse for the action that I did that harmed you. Whereas if I'm getting caught, I'm showing sorrow at being caught, not necessarily for what I did. I also think it's really fascinating that when I went into individual counseling, we didn't talk about the affair very much because when we first started, we ended up talking about what was going on with Brig and my need to be honest about his symptoms so that I could get the medical care for him. That was a huge topic, was learning how to not, oh my gosh, Brig's always been a big topic, yes. But I was learning how to stop the pattern of exaggerating and stretching the truth in order to be heard and get attention in an unhealthy way, to being completely honest and representing Brig's symptoms like very matter of fact so that he could get the care that he needed. And then once we got Brig's care under wraps and I could actually relax because I wasn't literally fighting whether or not he was going to be breathing every minute of every day. I'm not exaggerating, y'all. We went to the ER, I think 30 times in 28 days at one point, and it was the military. It was a mess. For more about that, you can read about that in my book, Raising Crazy Growing Up to Show Up, that I have not yet started writing, but it is next on the list. So anyway, I had to get that. I had to get my present day manageable And then the next thing that ended up happening was all of my trauma from my childhood exploded. And then Jim and I worked on that. So like for the first 18 months, I was getting all of this personal growth in counseling and working through a lot of my childhood complex PTSD issues. And then all of a sudden, the reasons I felt trapped, the reasons I felt compelled or obligated to have a sexual relationship with Michael suddenly started to make sense because of unresolved trauma from when he and I slept together in high school. And
for more information on that,
read the book.
That is very well described in the book and really the point behind it. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but for us as a couple, if you had also had some individual therapy with somebody helping to pace you and recognize the norms and as we would come together on couples therapy and they're like, okay, what are you learning in your individual therapy? I could have been like, I am processing so much childhood trauma. Like, it would have been really beneficial for us not to have couples therapy immediately after the affair because of the amount of individual growth that I needed to do on my own. But the challenge is because you weren't doing individual therapy, you were not experiencing individual growth for you that supported our ability to heal from the affair. And I share all of this here because the whole purpose of Unpacking Mormonism is to give our listeners skills and tools and insight in how to work through a lot of these events in your own lives. And so I think that this was a very important tangent.
Well,
now,
and
I'm going to bring it back to Joseph Smith. So go ahead.
Yeah, so just one more thing then too is that I feel like one of the ways in which the church handles this, the reason why it's an issue is because I felt justified in my anger towards you.
Absolutely.
And, well, whether or not I felt justified, but it didn't allow me to heal. It didn't allow me to focus on why I'm struggling. In fact, later on, it led to my own issues with pornography because of that angst.
Revenge.
And there was a lot of like vengeance kind of a feel there, although it happened later on.
Which, plug in, our next episode is going to explore men are not toxic, they're wounded. And we will be coming back to some of that. So just plug in, hang in next week. Woo woo.
If you'd been able to go to the bishop and the bishop had said, whoa, this sounds rough, guys. What can I do to help you come together? What can I do to help you heal? Instead of, okay, well, we need to have a disciplinary court because you committed adultery. If the bishop, and I don't blame the bishop, like he's an untrained person, he doesn't know, but if that bishop had been able to go, just stop for a second. You guys need to see someone that can actually help you work through this struggle. Maybe there needs to be some church discipline down the road. Okay, fine, we'll readdress that. But you need to go get healed first. And the problem is the church teaches that the disciplinary practice is part of the healing process.
Right.
And
it's
maybe
not.
Maybe it is, but only after someone has actually healed. If it comes first, there's no healing going on. It's just more wounding.
Right. And I love that you say that, Mason, because both times I went to the bishop, the first one being in high school and I was 16, I was forced to talk to the bishop by my parents. And then in 2004, I wasn't forced, but I went because it's what you wanted. Like, I was not ready.
Right.
I was traumatized.
And it would have been a fight if you'd have said, no, I'm not going. We'd have probably fought about that.
It would have ended the marriage, I think. So I was like, I'm going because I will do whatever Mason needs from me, which in a lot of ways is pretty healthy for me to be like, I am going to comply to, like, nowadays, at that time, there was no like social media. So it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to look at your phone. I'm going to none of that. But there is a temporary time period where giving the cheated on partner the ability to supervise certain actions in that way is very healthy. Temporarily.
And depending on how it's done, it has to be respectful.
Go talk to a professional about that,
A lot of qualifications on that.
But one of the things, and a chapter in my book is forgiveness is a symptom. It's a symptom of healing. And really what would have been best if we could combine that confessional with my church leadership and my mental wellness. What would have been ideal was the bishop to say, go to a counselor, get better. We'll readdress this.
Yes.
I'm going to check in with you in a couple of months. No disciplinary counsel yet.
Right.
Nothing. None of that. Maybe even I think it's stupid, but for their doctrinal purposes, don't take the sacrament for now. It's not a formal disfellowshipment, but just withhold from that and go talk to a counselor, and we'll talk every 3 months and just see how you're doing. And when you're ready, when you feel like you're in a better place, then let's talk about seeking that forgiveness, because it's done in the wrong order.
Right. If you had told him, if you'd been able to tell him, you know what, I'm not even sure how this happened.
I did tell him that.
Right. And if he'd have been able to step back and go, wait a second, she's not even sure how this happened. I think she needs to talk to somebody that can talk her through this way better than I can.
Right.
And you immediately, you don't kick it down the curb, right? You send it somewhere else where they can manage it better. And it just understanding, and I didn't understand that then.
Well, neither did
I wish I could have known then what I know now, right? And neither did you. That would have been handled a lot differently a lot better.
But the church could. Because the church has been telling people that they have to confess for sexual sins or serious sins for decades, eons, for millennia, since the beginning of its, inception, whatever.
Right. Good thing Joseph Smith did that.
Right. No. The rules did not apply to Joseph Smith.
I know.
But, no, I mean, there is enough data at this point that if the church would just stop for a minute and listen and train their bishops, because like the Mormon bishops who are the frontline confessees, right? We confess to them. If there was training that they had to take within even 6 weeks before they're called, because for the most part, an exiting bishop knows that they're being released. Before the new bishop comes in, give him some training so he's better prepared, and talk about when these things happen. Send them to counsel. Let's do the healing process in the right order. Because my affair in 2004 was so strongly influenced and impacted by the childhood trauma that I had experienced in 1997, 6, 7. Anyway, read the book. I think it's 97. In 97, that I needed to learn about that connection before I was in a place where healing could occur.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
And what happens in the churches, they're like, well, confess and then go get the healing.
Right.
But what ends up happening is
chest.
you're being shunned, you're being othered, you're being isolated. You're not allowed to pray in the community. You lose your calling. Even though it's supposed to be, quote unquote, confidential, all of the auxiliary leaderships are told, don't call on Sarah right now to pray because she's, just don't do it. Usually it's don't do it. And all the auxiliary leaders are like, oh, she's probably...
Right. If you're told that you can't pray in church, you know something serious happened.
I was leading the music in the primary at the time. I got released from that calling. A year later, they recalled me to it. I mean, and I had no calling in between. The ward fucking knew.
Right.
They didn't necessarily need to know the details, but they knew that something had happened. It also didn't help that I took off my garments and was pretty pissed about a lot of things. Read my book, you'll discover why. And frankly, if you read my book, you're going to be pissed right along with me. But yeah, if we looked at individual growth and understanding what led to it and healing the relationship and then coming to the feet of the Savior and saying, I've learned... Can you take the rest of this burden from me?
Right.
I think it would be a much more beautiful experience. Whereas for me, both times I was drug into the bishop's office, compounded my trauma, made things worse, and made me feel like I was separated from my higher power.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the big reasons that I didn't tell you about my struggle with
Pornography
initially was because I felt like if I came to you and told you about it before I had figured out how to manage it in my life, I would just be hurting you again and again.
Right.
It wasn't really a desire to hide it from you. It was really, as ignorant as it might have been, it was a desire to only hurt you once. And
right. Well, because in that flipped case, I discovered you did not disclose.
Yeah. And
I was pissed, not because it had happened, but because you hadn't come to me and told me.
Right.
Again, listen next week.
And so one of the reasons was that I didn't want to hurt you over and over again, and I felt like I had to manage it. Well, then if you kind of take that from the perspective you were just talking about, heal first. And of course, the scriptures teach us that
right, the woman taken in adultery.
How do you know if someone has repented? He will confess his sins and forsake them, right? Confessing is the first step. Now, I agree that acknowledging is the first step. You have to recognize that something is going on that you don't want in your life. But if you don't know why, then you have to be able to figure out why. What's going on in my life that led me to this situation?
Because if you don't understand the why, you do not have as much ability to effectively make permanent change moving forward.
Right, it's likely to happen again.
Sarah slept with Michael again.
Right, it's likely to happen again.
I don't even remember the exact year. I'm going to say 17, 19, somewhere. Yeah. Anyway. Blech.
Right, well, and now you're talking about a 15-year period where for the most part the whole situation was gone, although it cropped up every once in a while. For the most part it was gone. 15 years later it happens again, and you're still left going, wait, what the heck just happened here? And finally then you're able to approach
That's in the book too.
and finally come to an understanding of why. And now we're talking about trauma bonds, and now we're talking about these other things. You finally understand yourself enough to know what's going on. Then you can manage it, and then you can deal with it. But you can't do that if the first thought from an organization that you quote unquote trust, they're the ones that are supposed to be able to help you through this process.
Right.
If the first thing they want to do is tell you that was dumb, you can't go to the temple anymore. You can't pray in church anymore. Don't read your scriptures anymore. You can't take the sacrament anymore. All those things that are supposed to be an insane help in your life, they're all taken away because you're trash now. And if that's the way that organization is going to behave, why the hell would you want to go and get that from them?
Yeah.
For me, it would be almost, if I was still active, it would be one of those things like, yeah, this happened. Okay, when did this happen? Well, it happened about 9 months ago. Well, what have you been doing since then? I've been doing therapy. I've been trying to figure out why this happened. I've finally gotten to a place where I understand why and how to fix it, how to avoid it. If you want to do something now, you want to do some discipline, fine, whatever. I'm in a good place for me now. But when I go to you first, and the first thing you do is discipline me and take that away. Right. You know, I'm making this connection in my head in my own life. You know, you've taught me with our kids that you have to deal with the emotions first, right? And it's been very difficult for me to deal with that. But I'm seeing this connection that what's happening is I'm disciplining first, and I'm not taking the time to let you heal from whatever situation that is. And it hurts me that that's what the church has done, and then I'm seeing that very specifically in my own life right now too.
God, I love you because you're emotional, and I am so glad you saw that connection on your own. You're not alone. That's what parents do. You have to stop doing this behavior, and you have to go to your room. You're time out. You're going to lose your electronics right now. You're not giving your kids the opportunity to understand the value or experience the personal growth before the discipline. Honestly, most of the time, discipline isn't really necessary. Redirection, for sure. Discipline usually isn't with our kids. I love you, Mace.
That's the sound of tears, sort of.
Oh, no, I think our listeners can hear those emotions.
I think that, like you mentioned, forgiveness is a symptom, and we did a podcast on that, talking about how really forgiveness comes as I heal. Then I can decide when and if I'm in a place to be able to forgive, but it can't come first.
Right. Forgiveness
Just
comes
like
with
discipline.
Comes within. When we say I forgive you, there's not a lot of genuineness. That's not a real word.
Well, and I don't think that it's not.
Let me finish.
Okay.
You don't interrupt me. I'm allowed to interrupt you. You're not allowed to interrupt me. Get this
watch
right,
this.
Mason.
So I don't think it's so much that it's not genuine. Like in 2004 when you told me about the affair, I don't think it wasn't genuine.
Right,
It was that you didn't really understand why it had happened. And so if I rush the forgiveness and say, you know what, it's okay, it's going to be all right, but I don't understand why it hurt so much or why this is a problem, it's only going to recur.
That is because when you say I forgive you, before you have healed from the emotional wound, you are thought stopping. You are stopping yourself from experiencing the healing and then being able to extend the forgiveness from a place of, I am okay. I forgive you. It's like, I forgive you. I'm going to be okay. But you've closed the thought process. You've closed the, if I bring it up after I'm like, okay, I forgive you. And then I bring it up later. It's like, well, did you actually forgive me? And the answer is no. The answer is no. I cannot, I can say that I forgive you, but the actual experience of that burden being released, that's
released
and relieved. That's what that word meant. Relieved. Okay.
Well, and in this
Being
case, for me, it was,
from you.
I forgive you so we don't have to keep talking about
right.
this.
It was thought stopping. And that's the case.
Yeah.
I also want to point out that when we talk about the second affair, where the timeline is a little fuzzy, I actually had to kind of, the part 4 chapters of my book, all honest, some of the dates are approximate because I couldn't remember exactly. There was so much going on and my nervous breakdown happened right in the middle, which just compromises memory. So it all happened. The dates might be a little bit off. But one of the things that was really difficult for me the second time that it occurred with the same affair partner, damn it, was that at that point, I was a practicing counselor. I knew better. I had the understanding. What I was lacking was still the healing.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't gotten it the first time, and I was beginning to struggle with my church community. Like all of the things with the church were starting to really bubble up for me. And I was feeling in trouble, but I couldn't go to my bishop because it was you. Can't go to the stake president because he was an ass and he was old as fuck. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but he could not connect with me as a late 30s woman who was more educated than him on mental wellness. And it just wasn't a good outlet for me at the time.
Right.
And that's stake president and Bishop Roulet. Some stake presidents, amazing. Mine at that time in Colleen, good man, black and white thinker. It would have been pray, fast, read your scriptures, you'll be fine. Shush, go away.
Right.
That's what I would have gotten from
you know what?
that.
I'm going to
man.
help you heal by excommunicating you. Right.
And then I moved in the middle of that. I moved to Missouri.
Yeah.
And now I have the most pious bishop I've ever experienced. Did not like him. The second bishop that we've had since we've moved to Missouri. He's awesome.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah. Bishop Alec is his name right now, and he is amazing. I love the man. He's a true believing Mormon. He understands a lot of the issues. He's a nuanced believer. He has done nothing but love us.
He's reached out to me a couple of times.
He's done nothing but love us exactly where we are, which is what the church needs more of. However, his predecessor in our ward, not a chance.
Not so much?
No. So Bishop Roulet, I didn't have anybody to go to, but I also was hesitant to go to the church because I had my trauma compounded. I had religious trauma from this confessional stuff with no healing.
Right.
And
you
so
had two experiences where it obviously didn't work.
I had to go back into counseling as a counselor. I mean, I in my book, you're going to see, I think in my book, I talk about 4 different counselors. I want to say I've had 6. And of those 6, I've gotten like a nugget of wisdom from a couple of them, but then that long-term, deep growth that you want to experience in counseling, I got from 3 of them. Jim, and then Jerry, who those are their real names. Jim Fields is the real name. Jerry, won't give his last name because his spouse is still living. He passed away from a heart attack. Ooh, I'm going to start crying. And then the one that I saw with my parents, so I'm not going to share her name. Actually, I will. In my book, Unpacking Mormonism, her pseudonym is Shanice. So those are the counselors where that deep healing and growth came so that I could first forgive myself, then forgive you, Mason, for not showing up emotionally in a way you didn't know how. And then forgive Michael for compromising my boundaries and not honoring and not helping me honor my own. I'm not at all blaming him for everything, but he and I were not honoring the boundaries he and I were setting in our friendship relationship. And I feel that now we definitely are.
Well, and I think the big factor there is that when you came to a place where you understood yourself, and then you came to a place where you understood me and what my capacities were and weren't, what I had the tools for and what I didn't have the tools for. And then you came to understand Michael and what tools he had and what tools he didn't have and what his own experiences in life were. You were finally able to find a place where you could be you.
Truth.
And live up to what you wanted. In this case, it could be different for a lot of people. In this case, you wanted you and me to be a healthy relationship. And once you understood the 3 of us and probably some other things as well, you were able to finally find that place where it worked. You were able to heal and then be in that place.
Absolutely. And as a counselor, I needed another counselor to help me see above my own amygdala. This was not something, even though I'm an expert in couples therapy and I do it daily when I'm at work. Like I cannot even count how many clients I've walked through this and that I've sat with in this situation. I'm an expert and I couldn't do it for myself. I had to go to somebody else who could see above my own amygdala to reach my authentic self so that I can be in a place where I feel like we are healthier now than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You too are going through that counseling process to figure out your limits and my limits and understand it better. And it's been a long fucking road, y'all. I think it's been worth it. And you better say it's been worth it too, or I'm going to throw something at you.
It's absolutely been worth it.
Good for you.
It's been a rough road, but we've learned a lot about ourselves. We've learned a lot about each other, and we're in a place that we want to be. I feel like we're in our authentic place, and that doesn't mean everybody has to be in the situation that we're in, right? Everybody's situation is different, and I mean that with staying in a marriage. Like for us, that's what we wanted. We've made it work, and I feel like it's very healthy. For other people, it might be walking away from a marriage. For us, we're outside of the church. For other people, it might be holding tight on to the church because that's what works to help them heal. For us, it's, being here where we are. For other people, it might be somewhere else. Like everybody's situation is different. It's about finding and figuring out what it is that you as a person need, what you want, and what will help you live authentically to who you are.
Absolutely. As we tie this back in to Joseph Smith, we want to look for patterns of behavior. And some of the things that I see is that, the things that we know is that there was some type of sexual intimacy between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger that Emma Smith witnessed with her own eyes. Those are objective facts. The other objective facts is that Joseph and Emma were not allowed, or did not give themselves. They were allowed to. Joseph Smith did not allow. That's a more appropriate thing. Joseph Smith did not allow Emma to talk about it. So they could never heal from that betrayal. And the reason I say that is because every record we have of Joseph Smith after that talking about polygamy or polyandry or any of it, whether he was in fact in a polygamous marriage with Fanny Alger prior to the sexual interaction or not, sexually intimate interaction or not, Emma did not know about the marriage. And anytime it came up, the Lord gave another commandment that basically said, Emma, shut up. And if you don't, you're going to fucking hell. Get off my back. And maybe that is really harsh, but if you look at the history, that's what's going on. Joseph Smith lived his polygamy in deceit. He never followed the rules that of the Lord's revelation. He did not do it. There's not
I don't think he followed any of them.
Case of his polygamous wives where he actually followed the so-called rules from God. It was filled with deceit. You know, things like it was pretty normal for Joseph Smith to send a man on a mission and marry his wife while the husband was absent. And we know that Joseph Smith did have actual sexual intercourse with at least some of his wives based on the evidence that is the court reports, the court recordings, whatever. Oh, I can't remember what they're called. Anyway, from the Temple Lot case, where we can actually read the testimony that was reported in the Temple Lot case. And what that was is Joseph Smith was giving lots of land to people that were his polygamous wives.
Right.
So it became a huge deal because of favoritism and an unfair property assignment and whatnot. And again, if you want more information, there's tons of podcasts with source material. There's a lot of contemporary records such as journals. The Nauvoo Expositor is a great one. I would definitely say, and we've put the link in the show notes, head over to Amazon and buy the Nauvoo Expositor that Julia Sanders and America Marvel compiled. It is as close to word for word. I can't say it's word for word because they transcribed it from the Nauvoo Expositor into the book. So there could be editing mistakes. But if you catch an editing mistake, email them to do that. You can go to the previous episode. All of their contact information is there. So that way they can correct it. Because Julia Sanders and America Marvel are absolutely determined to accurately represent the source material. What I absolutely love about that book, which they gave us a copy, it's kind of a rough copy. They've got to work on some formatting and whatnot, which they're going to do. I gave them some of the resources that have worked really well for my book. And so as they kind of clean that up, it'll be easier to read. But it's an amazing resource that makes reading the components of the Nauvoo Expositor very easy. But in there, you can see that so many people knew about the polygamy. Joseph Smith went to his death denying it. And that's
in public, at least.
Yeah. And so, my question is, and Mason, I think you're actually the one that came up with this, so I'm stealing your thunder, is what was Joseph Smith trying to accomplish with all of these lies? Like, what was his goal?
Yeah.
And you raised your hand in between my little diatribe. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that outside of polygamy, you can see this same pattern in other aspects of his life, to include treasure digging, to include the way that the translation of the Book of Mormon was purported in the way it actually happened. In
the first vision. In the Kirtland Safety Society, the bank that really just was a mess. Right.
You can see that same kind of behavior where he's telling you one thing, but really something else is happening.
He's doing something else behind the scenes. Yeah.
It seems if you can finally step back and look and see the facts as they are just laid out, instead of just the facts that are laid out by the church, you can really see that the things that you've been taught
red flags.
are different in their intentions and the way they were actually brought about than the story that you were told. And I think understanding that is a huge deal.
Yeah, I have to laugh because, my question to what was he trying to accomplish was for you. And I find it funny that I represented your question and now you're representing mine, because mine was, what does that say about his character as an individual? When we see these repeated patterns of behavior, what does that say about an individual? Like for me, myself,
well, I have an answer, by
I
the way.
wouldn't have trusted myself to tell an accurate story prior to age 25. I wouldn't have, because I struggled with being honest. Post age 25, I didn't anymore. Like Jim really helped me get through that. But I had to laugh because I interrupted you and was like, ooh, yeah, there's some red flags here. And then it reminds me of something that Ian Lumgair said on I think it was in our Facebook group, was that, there's lots of red flags and people have white flags. I'm a black flag. And for me, he was joking. Love the man. He's not a black flag. Ian, love you out there. Jill, love your husband so much. But one of the things that really sticks out for me is that some of these for me were a black flag for Joseph Smith. Like it, for me, killed his credibility because a higher power is supposed to be honest. There's supposed to be a level of transparency. And if polygamy really was God's plan, then there would have been an honest way where Joseph Smith could have been transparent and God would have provided a way to protect him from the illegalities, the legalities of it from the United States government. Yes, he would have lost some congregants, but if it was true, frankly, Joseph Smith did not trust the God that apparently came to him. There was no trust there because he was so dishonest. There would have been a way, if it was truly God's will, for it to come about without the dishonesty, the deceit, the obfuscation. Obfuscation. All right, Mason,
So
I'll let
I
you
have
go.
an answer to your question. What was Joseph Smith trying to accomplish? There's two words. And in Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, verse 54, Joseph Smith says this, because I don't believe this came from God anymore. And I command mine handmaiden Emma Smith to abide and cleave unto my servant Joseph and to none else. But if she will not abide this commandment, she shall be destroyed, saith the Lord, for I am the Lord thy God, and will destroy her if she abide not in my law. The first answer, what was he trying to accomplish? Was control. Control. The very next verse.
Control of his wife, but also his congregants.
Right. Not just control of Emma, but control in general.
Very narcissistic. Like for me, when I was lying as a youngling, in my young 20s, I was lying because I needed people to notice and didn't realize that my stretching of the truth was actually having the opposite effect.
Right.
But I agree with you. For Joseph, it appears that he was lying to gain and maintain control of other humans in an undue, influential way.
So next verse, 55. But if she will not abide this commandment, then shall my servant Joseph do all things for her, even as he hath said. And I will bless him and multiply him and give unto him an hundredfold in this world of fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, houses and lands, wives and children, and crowns of eternal lives in the eternal words. The second word was power. I think that is what it was about. It was about control and power. Whether or not he felt like he was doing the right thing, I don't know. I will never know that. And frankly, it doesn't matter to me anymore. Right. But I see a desire for control and for power.
Which is so funny because what's the scripture also in the Doctrine of Covenants of you get a little power, woe be to that man, the priesthood man. All right, Mason's going to read. Mason's going to read that while he's looking that up. Oh, go ahead, Mason.
Because this is actually going to come up a little bit in next week's episode when we talk about men, because this has a lot to do with that. But this is section 121, verse 39. We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men as soon as they get a little authority
except
as
Joseph,
they suppose.
Almost all men. So this is all
but
men
not
except Joseph.
Yeah, he doesn't fall into that.
All right, keep going.
So I guess he must not be a man.
I'm being snarky.
As soon as they get a little authority as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. And if you don't believe that Joseph Smith had a little bit of power, you don't understand Mormonism. He had, in a lot of ways, he had absolute power over that congregation. And the ones that he couldn't control, he kicked out.
Yeah. What a great guy.
Anyway, so to close it up, we want to...
No,
we're
I have
not closing up? Okay.
No, we're
mind.
closing up, but I want to do it. So get off of my toes over here.
Oh, I missed. God.
What did you throw at me?
I threw my little stress ball, but I went right over your head.
Jerk. Where'd it go? I'm not throw it back. I am going to throw that back at you when I find it. I don't even know where it went. Okay. One of the things that I really want to point out. So in the beginning of the podcast, our intent for today was to really talk about and explore how being honest about the hard shit that comes up in life, because we all have it.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully yours isn't marital affairs. In my epilogue,
but I'm sure for some of you it is.
Yeah. I talk about in my epilogue how damaging it can be. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I still struggle with feelings of disgust in myself for having walked into that trap and put our marriage and our family through that. It's really difficult, but I really wanted to model that couples can talk about it in a healthy way, that as you're more honest and transparent about it, and I mean, be gentle, but be honest. Gentle and honesty, they can go hand in hand.
Right.
And if you need help, get professional help. If you truly care about the people that you are in relationships with, whether that be your boss, your peers, your spouse, your kids, your family, whatever it is, that being honest builds and helps you recover trust after betrayal. One of the things that bothers me the most about the way that polygamy went down in the church, about a lot of Joseph Smith's and then Brigham Young's, and unfortunately, the more I learn about church history, the more I see this pattern of dishonesty in the high up leaders. And when I'm talking about the high up leaders, I'm talking primarily about the prophet, the first presidency, and the quorum of the 12 apostles. Occasionally, I'm going to extend that down to the 70 when they're speaking in general conference. But there is a pattern of gaslighting. There is a pattern of whitewashing. There is a pattern of blatant dishonesty that is really disturbing. For Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, especially both of them, the more they lied, the more they removed the free will of their followers and the people around them. This was the birth of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons, becoming an unhealthy and toxic organization. John DeLynn likes to talk about, they didn't have informed consent. And that's not the terminology I would generally use. It's a little bit different. For me, and I think, Mason, I'm going to speak for you as well. Tell me if I'm wrong. But as a medical professional, both of us are medical professionals. When we talk about informed consent, part of that process is informing the patient or the client or the participant of the potential benefits and risks based on the evidence that we have of how whatever treatment modality we are going to use works. So when we talk about informed consent for religious stuff, it's really hard to be able to sit down and be like, well, these are the benefits and these are the potential risks and blah, 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 because it's just there's so much context. It's so convoluted. There's just too many moving pieces. Whereas in medical science, we can say, like for me, I can say approximately 82% of the couples that I see in my clinic that actually utilize the Gottman method get better.
Right.
And then I can tell them...
That's pretty specific.
It is. And then I can say, the 18% that don't, these are generally the reasons why. Number one, they're not using the method. Number two, and I'm able to catalog that before they participate in the therapy. That is informed consent. Right. So I don't really like that term. I might end up using it, but I just wanted to make that differentiation there. And no discredit or no disrespect to John DeLynn. He's doing a great job with what he's doing over at Mormon Stories. But what I'm going to say is that when Joseph Smith was dishonest about his treasure digging, the multiple First Vision events, those other things that we talked about, he was removing the information that his members needed to make an informed decision.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, that means he removed their free will to choose healthfully. I don't know.
Because a choice based on
Fact.
A choice based on supposed facts is going to be different than a choice based on facts.
Right.
Like, yeah.
He lied, in my opinion, as Mason said, to control others. I believe that there's always a little bit of fear behind the lie. I think he lied because he was afraid nobody would believe him if he told the truth. And as of today, I think that the church still does that. By not coming out and being just completely transparent with the icky shit, they are stopping the members who are not able or not willing on their own to go out and look at the source material to make an informed decision of what that means for them.
Well, because most of them feel like they don't need to do that. They
Because
feel like they have the facts. Yep.
Because they trust that leadership, because that's what they've been taught.
Right. Why should I go search for facts? I have them right here.
Because of that culty mentality of don't question your leaders, that's a sin. Trust us implicitly, because if you don't, it's dangerous. The church is controlling those people. They are expecting you to make a decision without the appropriate information that we have. There's a huge difference between I don't know how this could affect you and this is what the data says. And in this way, they could say, look, I don't know how this truth is going to impact you, but this is what we know. This is what we know to be.
This is how it's impacted me, even if you don't know, right?
I know several people who know about these icky things and are still members. I think when we did our special episode the other day, D. Michael Quinn, is it Michael D. Quinn or D. Michael Quinn?
D. Michael Quinn.
Knows all of the icky shit. And he's still an active member. Like, Mormonism still works for him.
And he's openly gay. So he has figured out a way to come to terms with all that. And good for him. Right? If that's what works for him, then great.
Right. And so that would be an indication that it can work with that honesty. And so how does being honest about the hard things protect mental wellness? Well, number one, if the church would come out and own it, then those who discover it would already have a one-up on the path to recovery from that betrayal trauma. Because when you find out that the church has been lying to you or whitewashing it or prettying it up so that it's more palatable, the normal human response is either thought stop, because the trauma, the betrayal, the idea that the betrayal is even possible is just so overwhelming that the brain shuts down to protect you from trauma.
We talked about that a little bit in the cult series too, yeah.
And so those who actually push through and truly consider this information, you are experiencing a form of religious betrayal trauma. That's why it hurts so damn much when your worldview falls apart. It's very similar to the discovery of an affair.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to just drive that point home. So no matter what you're dealing with, if you are struggling with being honest, truly honest with the people in your life, I'm not saying go on a honesty cleansing mission. If you're struggling...
No deathbed confessions, right?
Yeah, please no deathbed confessions. If you've carried it that long, just do your spouse a favor. Let it be. But no, honestly, if you're struggling to be honest, that's usually an indication that you have some pretty significant emotional wounds going on, and you need help to understand that. I needed help to learn how to be honest. And I'm going to tell you, it was a long 18 months of therapy. And I value what Jim taught me about taking accountability and representing the story factually and calling myself out when I tend to exaggerate. That has been one of the greatest positive impacts I've ever experienced in in therapy. And thank you, Jim Fields. I don't know where you are anymore. You're ancient because you were pretty old when I saw you.
Ouch.
No, I think he was approaching his mid-60s when I saw him, so it's 20 years ago. So he would be mid-80s
so
now.
Ancient. Yeah.
I love that man.
That's the way
so
to get him
much.
to reach out to you, by the way.
I really should try and look him up, see how he's doing. But no, seriously, he changed my life, and he really set me up to be successful when I saw Jerry and then later Shanice in my life. So if you need that help,
I mean,
seek
he changed
it.
my life too, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He did change your life. Unfortunately, your family has never recovered from those early years of Sarah. They still like to blame me for the 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old version, not the 25 and beyond version.
They don't put much value in emotional health, so
or
they can't see
or significant permanent change to your character, which is fine. That's for another day. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please go out and buy my book. We've given you some pretty good sneak peeks. I think that this podcast episode and the other ones that we're going to be doing on truth telling will be much more significant to you if you're reading the book, because you're going to have all of the details, the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the things that Zoe told me, so the character Zoe in the book reached out to me the other day because I asked her, I said, hey, we're doing some promos for the book. What are some of your thoughts? And I just want to read this in closing, and then we will close out. So Zoe said, so I asked Zoe, I posed this question on our special episode. I got a little Facebook Messenger group with some of my closest friends from high school. And so I posed the question, hey, ladies, we are doing a book promo. I want to know what parts of my book was I honest about that I stumbled over this last time too. Hey, ladies, we are doing a book promo and want to know what parts of my book was I honest about my shit that was inspiring or healing for you. Okay, I want to make sure that I say this. That sentence, that question, needs my editor to clean it up. Alrighty. And Zoe's response was, honestly, I think it was the idea that the perception of perfection is false. I thought your family was perfect, and I so badly wanted to be a Lee, just to find out that in the end, I was grateful to be and I'm going to put in a blank because I didn't give Zoe a last name in the book, and I'm not going to give away their identity.
A Smith.
Right.
A Jones.
Doe.
I was grateful to be a part
Zoe
of my family.
Doe.
Yeah.
Zoe Doe.
There you go.
Just to find out that in the end, I was thankful to be a Doe. Because even though I was there was so much I wasn't privy to, because that perception of perfection had to remain.
Yeah.
I want my readers to normalize struggle. I want to normalize humanity so that you can learn to love yourself at your worst. Because if you can love yourself at your worst, it's really easy to see yourself at your best. Thanks so much for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications, LLC, and Alex Vidalis. Please join our community on Facebook. Music provided by Musa and Don Worthy Music. Good news, my vision should come back. If it follows the way it has before, my vision should come back. I should walk normal. I won't be quite as tired. Probably over the next 2 to 4 weeks, things are going to really improve. At least that's been my MO before. The bad news is I's going to be a bitch for the next week. Good luck to everybody. So, alrighty. So we are talking today, change of subject, squirrel.